This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I have the pleasure of bringing to our Halo Talks audience one of the largest Planet Fitness area developers and a good friend of mine from the legacy health club industry from the Northeast, the Joe Pepe Sr. and Jr. family. Joe Pepe Jr., welcome to your first Halo Talks.
Thanks, Pete. It's great to be here with you.
Awesome. So, I've known you guys since back in the day when you had your cluster of clubs, and then did a deal with Omar, who I went to business school with. And, you and I met. I think your dad was dressed in a nice suit when I met him, and, was always one of the thought leaders and action leaders in the industry. So for the people that don't know about the Pepe family in the health club industry, maybe give a little bit of a quick primer here to start.
Yeah, so the family goes way back. I mean, my dad has been in the industry since, I would say, the late 70s. I mean, he worked in, European health spa and ultimately, was a consummate entrepreneur. Early 80s opened a women's only gym, and then, eventually owned a few world gyms and Gold's gyms, kind of through the late 80s, early 90s. And so, he's been in the industry for a very long time. In 2003 is when he kind of heard about the Planet Fitness brand. And I guess the story was he had a few clubs in Connecticut, non-Planet Fitness, and a big box competitor was coming into his market. And the club that he sort of worked out of, like literally had his office in that club, and realized they were lower price and a probably nicer facility. And so he set up a meeting with Planet Fitness founders at the time. Again, this goes back to 2003, and made the decision to switch over to Planet Fitness. His 3 clubs then in Connecticut. It's kind of a big news at the time. So he was very well known in the World Gym atmosphere and being a Gold's licensee as well. And so, I think he was really part of, the real early days of Planet. I think we had, location number 8 out of, close to 3,000 now. We were franchisee number something like 3. And again, just through his connections with World Gym owners, et cetera, you started to see some more people get interested in the Planet Fitness brand and start to convert over. And so, so we owe a lot to him as being, our founder here and, setting a great culture. I mean, he's a person that cares about culture and the member experience. And, we continue to preach that in our business every day.
And a little known fact that probably most people don't know is that at one point, Planet Fitness acquired World Gym, the franchisor, tried their hardest to convert as many World Gym owners to the Planet business model and brand. And a lot of them didn't want to do it, which they probably regret. And then Planet ended up selling the World Gym franchisor to a group out of California. But an interesting, kind of footnote on the Planet Fitness, desire to rebrand legacy clubs into the Planet model. And that was pretty much, you're probably the only successful, case study on that as far as I know. So kudos to you and your dad for recognizing that the business model was a disruptor at the time and, getting in on the ground floor of that. So when did you actually start working inside the club, excluding, child labor law issues in Connecticut?
Go back to before I should have been, but I've always, spent time in the clubs for sure. I actually got involved in the business in 2007. So I went to college, graduated in 2007, and, it was an interesting time. Planet Fitness was growing rapidly at the time. I was an economics major. I thought I'd go into consulting or banking or finance or something along those lines. And, the person who actually recruited me to come to Planet Fitness was someone who's been on your show before, CJ Bouchard. CJ is the CEO of Excel, another large franchisee group. I'd known CJ since I was a kid. He used to live in Connecticut. Yeah. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I remember him calling me as a senior in college. I was like, look, this Planet thing is really interesting. And, I could use some help here in North Carolina. So I actually decided to move to Raleigh, North Carolina out of college, learn the business from the ground up. Noticed that it was a disruptor and really didn't want to work in the family business, I guess is the way I would explain it. So I worked for CJ for a couple of years, and again, open clubs, was a GM in a store, kind of learned the business and was there for some time, ended up coming back to Connecticut a little while later to work with my father's group, who had some partners that were, we were scaling, we were trying to grow and need more help. So I came up to Connecticut and, helped grow our business to about 15 locations as of 2012 as sort of a director of operations role. And then in 2012 is when, we had brought on our first private equity partner. You mentioned Omar Simmons earlier. He was, runs Exaltair Capital Partners. And at the time it was interesting. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to take my GMATs and go to business school and figure out what I want to do with my life. Because, private equity is coming in and is going to buy our business. Omar gave me an incredible opportunity to stay and actually get my MBA. So we went through the deal in 2012. And then from 2014, I did an executive MBA program at Columbia from 2014 to 2016, which was awesome. And then, call it, in 2012, we had 15 stores that we sold. We grew to 108 over the next, call it 9 years, about half through acquisitions of other planets, half through, greenfield stores. And then in 2021, we sold to a new private equity firm that's owned us for the last 4.5 years. And they've just been, tremendous sponsors as well. So it's been interesting to see the evolution from, again, this family business to a private equity, scaled business. And it's been a great ride.
Yeah, just as a footnote, Omar and I went to Harvard Business School together. And at our 25-year reunion a couple of years ago, we did a case study on his acquisition of Planet. And I had two rotary phones next to each other. And we kind of re-dramatized the conversations. Hey, should I buy Planet? I'm like, yeah, you should definitely buy Planet. How do you feel about the franchisor? Wish they had private equity, maybe a little more predictable. And then they got private equity. And then he's like, hey, I'm going to double down on this deal. I'm like, good idea. Get more territory. Good idea. So we joke around that it was my pro bono banking relationship with a good friend from business school that turned out to be a big home run and success story for everybody involved.
Yeah.
So as you, kind of started working in the business and understood the Planet business model, what kind of got you so excited about it to say, hey, I'm going to do this as a career? And how early on did you know, like, hey, this is something special here?
Yeah, I can't say I knew that early on. At the time, again, kind of mid 2000s, it was just such a disruptor. It was serving a market and demographic that was underserved, right? It sort of democratized fitness. It knocked down barriers in terms of intimidation, and then it was at a price point that was just affordable for everybody. And so, really serious about clean, comfortable, non-intimidating. And, you just saw that as it was a business that you can scale. It was a little bit less intensity in terms of the business model. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think there was ever a point where I was like, this is the thing. I think it's just, you surround yourself with good people, you learn along the way. I'm always impressed by the franchisee network and the franchisor as well. And it's just continued to compound incredibly well. It's a resilient brand that, I'm really proud to be a part of. And so I think it's just over time, kind of morphed into this thing that's become, a sizable business, and we're impacting so many lives in the communities that we serve. And that's what we're really proud of.
Thinking back to, when you were probably sitting at the kitchen table, and I kind of remember this myself when my dad was running a company and he was the CEO, and he used to come back with inventory reports and talk about ownership and, growth and new product lines. He was in the food service equipment business. But when you think about, back to some of the dinner table conversations, probably with your dad when you guys were running, only a few clubs and, maybe taking out a loan with a, personal guarantee or maybe a mortgage or, leverage a home equity line and just kind of bet it all versus now looking at how private equity kind of looks at companies, looks at scale, knowing that you don't have to sign a personal guarantee on the loan, on the lease, on the equipment, on anything. And you can really just focus on growth if it pencils out and you can execute on that plan. What are some of the takeaways that you've had on, the ability to have rapid growth and thinking about that as, an independent operator versus a private equity backed portfolio company CEO?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say, private equity typically invests in businesses that were, founded by somebody who took a risk at some point. Right. And I do hear the old stories of, my fathers would tell me, oh, this business I did on a credit card. And then I had 2 credit cards and I maxed that one out. So I did. And it was really like that. Right.
Yeah, I've been there. I've done that.
Yeah. And so, when I think private equity is, capital is an accelerant, right? And it provides you the ability to grow faster. Our partners now have just made, intentional investments to, build a real scalable platform. So you think about, the people you're able to hire, marketing, real estate construction, operations, human capital, finance. They've really allowed us to build out a great team. And at the end of the day, though, Pete, you make decisions as an entrepreneur based on, how do you allocate capital for the highest return, right? And so private equity does the same thing. Like, where we're going to get the best return on our capital. I think the timeline is obviously different, right? And so you have a little bit more strict in terms of how quickly you're generating the returns that a private equity group is seeking. But I've enjoyed being in that environment. You have a board of directors, you have true governance, you have operational rigor, which is amazing, and you have the capital to be able to do things like acquisitions, like put up new stores very quickly, and you probably take some risks too. We have a very much a kind of test and learn philosophy here. We test different things and we learn from it, and the best idea wins. And so it's different, but in a lot of ways the same in terms of at the end of the day, in our business, it's the member experience, and are the customers getting a great experience at the club level? And we try and keep that, very much alive today.
Yeah. As you take a look at how Planet has evolved and become a public company, and you've got a lot of private equity in a lot of different territories, how do you, share ideas or best practices with some of the other area developers? Obviously, CJ, is a friend of yours and a good friend. I've been, Integrity Square has gotten involved with several Planet area developers on growth, and I feel like there's a lot of accelerant flow of like, hey, this is how you should do it, rebranding. This is how and I feel, talk maybe a little bit about what the franchisee network provides you and how you've kind of leveraged that.
Tremendous. I mean, some of my, closest business colleagues, are in the franchisee network. From, we have various committees that work very closely with our headquarters, Planet Fitness headquarters, on all things around our business, marketing and operations and site selection and, human capital. And so, a lot of times the value of being in a franchise is being able to share those ideas and, hey, I already went through this and here's how I handled it. There's we have a Planet Fitness Independent Franchisee Council that, meets regularly and really has just a great relationship with the franchisor and amongst each other. We have conferences and meetings and workshops. And so you learn so much from that network, and I owe a lot to them. And I think being able to share those best practices, debate on certain things is great. It brings, out the best ideas. And that's where we get a lot of our, kind of evolution from.
Yeah. And then from a standpoint of marketing, I run this Halo Academy. So we go through case studies and we go through the franchise disclosure documents. And the amount of money that Planet spends on a club by club basis for marketing, not just a 2% ad fund that, gets you some pretty nice exposure during, when the ball drops in Times Square and everyone's wearing Planet Fitness gear. I'm sure it doesn't hurt sales for the first couple of weeks of the year. But the local marketing's never been something that has been diminished or under invested in. So talk about for a minute, if you can, how Planet really goes in and saturates a market, and that is a relentless and continuous part of the business model. Where I see a lot of clubs will do like, grand opening, and they'll spend some money and then they'll kind of ratchet it back. But Planet's really like, hey, I'm going to continuously get anybody here that wants to enter the industry as a member. Like, we want them.
Yeah, we continue to believe in marketing in so many ways. I think it's just getting, us, at Ignite, continuing to get smarter with, performance marketing and where those local dollars are going and how they're allocated. And, we've invested in a marketing mix model to look at that allocation and be smarter with where we're spending. But we're not trying to pull back spending. We are, we continue to believe that we are the gym for the first time gym goer and people that may not be a member of a gym. And so that's always been Planet's bread and butter. And that's been sort of our, brand promise. And there continues to be, a large percentage of the population that is not, a member of a gym. And so we think we should be continuing to market throughout the year because, there's some seasonality in our business for sure. But I think now more than ever with just, the tailwinds you see in the industry, GLP-1s and health and wellness, recovery, technology, personalized, technology for fitness, there's much more awareness for it. But at the end of the day, you got to do the work. You still got to work out, right? And so, we believe in continuing to market. It helps build up our competitive advantage and a moat, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. How has how have you been able to benefit from the growth where there are guys that are either assistant general manager or general manager becomes a district manager? How have you kind of been able to use that bench, and how have you been able to not have to bring people in like at the top level, but you actually like growing a team?
The people in front of our members are the most important, right? And so building that management layer is critical. We've continued to invest more dollars in the people that are closer to our members, so the people out in the field. So thinking of things like, having a GM in every club, an assistant manager, up to district managers and regional directors, that is so critical in our markets. And, building that bench is something we're super focused on from our ops team and our human capital team. And how do we onboard? How do we develop? How do we keep people growing? And we can go across our business here at Ignite, and there are so many stories of people that came in as probably minimum wage, front desk worker, and now have progressed, 3, 4, 5 layers on. It's great to see. It brings you a lot of joy to see people develop that are truly bought in and enjoy being part of something bigger. You're working in a club, you're in that one store, but when you have 140 across our portfolio, we try and bring teams together for things like town halls and sharing best practices, workshops. And so I think that goes a long way. And at the end of the day, we always say that the people in our store are most important. They treat our people well in the store. They'll treat our members well, keep them coming back. We talk about our non-negotiables all the time in our stores. It's a hello and goodbye. It's your cleanliness of your store, and it's your, we call it machine kind of downtime. Your machines work. Is the store clean? And are you giving a real great hello and goodbye, learning members' names, ask them how they feel after a workout? That's the most important thing, and that's how we're touching so many customers every day.
So I'd say before a couple of years ago, there weren't that many acquisitions that were being made by Planet area developers of independent operators. It was mostly greenfield growth. I think maybe given the cost of construction, the time it takes to construct, and also the dynamics of independent operators such as Gold's Gyms or World Gym operators that maybe don't have anyone in the business from a succession standpoint. The kids don't work in the business. Their general manager doesn't want to buy or cannot get the financial resources to buy it. So we've done we did a deal down in Houston last year with Scott Sanders, picking up 5 fitness projects, which used to be Gold's Gyms. I heard that was a very successful transaction and integration. CJ with Excel acquired Texas Family Fitness down in Dallas. So how do you kind of see this next evolution of growth where, I'm sure you got plenty of greenfield opportunities, that when I sign on a dotted line, that thing's not opening for 6 to 12 to 18 months, depending on the development schedule, versus kind of, honing in on, hey, if I can do acquisitions here, I can rebrand it. Planet Corporate, obviously, is okay with that and encouraging that now, where I think they weren't really that excited about it before a couple of years ago. So how do you see that as kind of another, channel of growth?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you kind of view going into that M&A game versus the greenfield game?
Yeah, very different muscles, I would say. The M&A game is, kind of speed, integration, culture reset, maybe, but really it's sort of the integration and obviously working with the seller and making it, something that's appealing to them. I think, we've done some of these in the past, and usually there's somebody who wants to, get some liquidity or monetize their business in some way and maybe doesn't have a successor, or it could be something as simple as, hey, I have multiple locations and this one is, the lease is up, and what do I want to do here? Do I want to re-up or reinvest, or is there an or am I in a competitive market where it might make sense to sell in some way? And so I think we don't go in there high pressure. We're out there. We're talking to a lot of our competitors through different industry panels and things, and so we know a lot of them. I think it's a matter of just going in the right way and making it a situation where they can have an opportunity to continue on, and it provides an exit that they may not have gotten otherwise. So I think that's it's a real avenue of growth for us from a membership perspective. It may be from even just site selection, in a competitor that has a great site in one of your markets versus, greenfields is, a little bit longer term. As you said, you gotta negotiate a deal, find the right site. We try to be very thoughtful in terms of our real estate analytic model and putting together our investment memos, et cetera. But it takes time, right? And so it's a way to accelerate our growth in certain markets, especially markets that we're going to be in. We're going to be looking for a site in, and it might make sense to have one gym instead of 2 or 3 or 4. And so, is there a consolidation opportunity there that works for a seller is kind of how we position it.
Yeah. So just 2 comments. One is just so the audience knows here, if there's independent operators that may have clubs in the Ignite territories, and we'll talk about that in a minute, which states you have, you're obligated to build in those locations, because sometimes I'll get a call from someone saying, hey, a Planet area developer contacted me. Should I take this call? And I'm like, you must take this call, because they have to build in this city. They have a contractual obligation to put a certain amount of clubs in a city that they've secured exclusive, area development rights for. So you probably have one chance to take that call, or else they're going to build out the greenfield strategy. And then your club's clearly less desirable, as a flagship or a beachhead or a market share, play. So from a standpoint of the territories that you guys are focused on, or have, milestones to hit in certain areas, can you go through those couple of states or territories?
Yeah, predominantly in the Northeast. So we're in, Connecticut, upstate New York, from Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. About 80 of our stores are in the Northeast. We have the area in Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Knoxville specifically, as well as clubs in Albuquerque, New Mexico, mainly in other parts of southern New Mexico, and then the 3 Western Canadian provinces. So British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. About 25 locations in Canada, and then the remaining in the US. But those are the main areas where we operate and where our development obligations are.
And given that, your family's been in the business, your dad and your family to some extent, and you have been on the other side of some of these deals where you have been a seller. How do you think that benefits you from negotiating a deal or saying, hey, look, I know how it feels. I know that this is potentially, your baby. This isn't a box to you. This isn't a 20,000 square foot box, but this is something that you might have built with your hands. You might have changed the HVAC system on your own. You might have painted these walls, and I'm going to help you kind of take it from there. How do you think that kind of benefits that you've been in that mix before and know what it's like to kind of sell something that you built?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you said it well. I mean, these are, people that may have been operating their business and it's been their livelihood for, 20, 30, 40 years. And so I think anybody has to feel like they're selling to somebody that they can trust, that has high integrity. And, I think that's part of what you have to portray as a buyer. Like we've done acquisitions before, quite a few of them. We've integrated people. We have people from those acquisitions that are still, part of the Ignite team, many years later. And so like anybody, it's not just the price, it's who are you selling to, especially when you have likely employees that have worked for you a long time and have, uncertainty around what a sale is like. And so I think getting in there early and, calling some of those concerns is super important. And, but we can understand why you'd have them. You want to sell to somebody who's going to take your baby, and do good things with it, kind of going forward. So very important.
Yep. Great. And then in closing here, as you've built out your team, what are some of the, highlights, if you will, or things that you've been like pleasantly surprised by? Maybe, somebody moving from one, area of focus to another and excelling, or, people that you built up over time that are now running, big parts of your organization?
Yeah, look, I first off, I can't take credit for it. I mean, it's the person. Talent is so important in terms of what you do. I mean, the person who oversees our, field operations. I remember interviewing him, over a decade ago for, a job at one of our clubs, and has just developed into a tremendous leader. People overseeing, they were in the finance team, now overseeing, kind of real estate strategy, and so people in our clubs that are now on our marketing team or field marketing team and corporate sales. So it's tremendous to see that growth and development, and but they get the credit. It's people that are bought in, that wake up every day with a sense of responsibility, try to get better every single day. Remain optimistic. As I said, surround yourself with good people, and good things happen. And it's really a testament to just the people I'm around every day, and what they've been willing to give to grow.
Awesome. All right. Well, you heard it here first, Joe. Good to see you. I'm glad to get the story down here and for everyone to know how Ignite has evolved from just a couple clubs in Connecticut to taking on the Planet brand to now being owned by and growing an all-star team and backed by a big private equity fund. So as I tell people, if you're working or you're backed by a big private equity fund over $1 billion, you're basically playing in the professional leagues of business. So you are the team manager or the captain. So glad to have you waving the Halo flag around on our industry's behalf. So congrats on what you built. Look forward to updates along the way.
Thanks for having me, Pete, and thanks for everything you're doing within the industry. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Awesome. Good to see you. This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks, your captain speaking. I am the founder and managing partner at Integrity Square. We've been around now for 15.5 years. We have been helping people like yourselves get capital, do mergers and acquisitions, consulting, strategic advice in the health, active lifestyle, and outdoor Halo sector, trying to help as many entrepreneurs as possible get to the next level, take that inflection point, and be the force behind your growth. We are helping companies that have at least $3 million of EBITDA, around $10 million of revenue, and we are positioned to help you get institutional growth capital or to negotiate deals with strategic partners. If you go to integritysq.com/ISQ, you can see our capabilities deck. Happy to set up a consultation at any time. That is free of charge, and we look forward to helping solve obesity, loneliness, and diabetes. Go Halo.